Okay, Macho, maybe we can start live streaming. All right. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Good morning to all who are with us, tuning in right now at the Miriam College Diplomatic Hour. So this is the 5th episode of the Miriam College Diplomatic Hour, a live streamed, free-flowing discussion and conversation on politics, economics, and humanitarian. Right. Sorry for that. Right. So again, welcome to the Diplomatic Hour 5th episode, conversations on politics, economy, and humanitarian issues. This is brought to you by the Institute of Global Affairs and Diplomacy. And currently, we are offering the Bachelor of Arts in Global Affairs and Diplomacy, which is a 4-year program. So my name is Miguel Dorotan, or you can call me Migs, and one of the program coordinators for the BAGD program. And I will be your host for today. For this episode, and hopefully in the upcoming episode, the Association of the Former International Civil Servants, or AFIX Philippines, which is a member organization of the Federation of Association of International Civil Servants, or FAFIX, if that I got it correctly, which is composed of 63 member associations located in all regions of the world. AFIX Philippines provides assistance to its members on health insurance, pensions, and general well-being. In myriad ways, its members continue to do work complementing their United Nations mission. So before I introduce our guest for today, we would like also to acknowledge Mr. Edmundo Ortega, the current president of the AFIX, and Mr. Cecilio Adorna, or Sir Ces, the past president of AFIX Philippines. Both held senior leadership positions in the UNEP and UNICEF respectively, and are not stranger to United Nations humanitarian operations. Magandang umaga po, Sir Edmundo and Sir Ces. Would like to say some hi. You're currently on mute lang. You may.
Thank you. And I think we should let the program go on.
All right. We hope that we'll see you in our future episodes. And if you have anything you want to pitch in during the discussion for the session, you're free to just enjoy or join us during the discussions. Again, maraming salamat po at good morning to both of you, gentlemen. All right, so let's get into our guests. Now, if we may introduce, first up, we would like to introduce Miss Lori T. Calvo. Lori began her career in UNICEF in 1987 in Manila, supporting children in armed conflict situations in Mindanao. Her work focused on developing community-based approaches to facilitate children's access to health, education, and protection services during her first international assignment, during and post-conflict situations. In 1996, she had her first international assignment in Rwanda, where she worked with multiple NGOs and government agencies, monitoring systems for tracing and reunification of unaccompanied children, orphans, and child-headed households. She also helped with developing frameworks on child protection and juvenile justice. From 1998 to her retirement in 2013, she served as program officer on social policy with focus on HIV/AIDS in Swaziland, program coordinator in Papua New Guinea, and then state chief of UNICEF West Bengal in India. Her work focused on organizing and capacity building of local and national leaders, women leaders, service providers, and youth to prevent the abuse of women and groups, as well as promote the rights of women and children to life. In India, her work also focused on the prevention of child marriages by mobilizing statewide resources, including the participation of youth as advocates. She started her career in social development in 1978 as a researcher focused on functional literacy of women in rural Mindanao with the Philippine Business for Social Progress in Davao City, and then as human resource trainer for autonomous regions with the Philippine Office of Muslim Affairs. In her retirement, Lori and her husband Roger runs a small resort in Siargao, Philippines. Soon. Miss Lori. Magandang umaga or magandang bisaya, Miss Lori. Yeah. Our second guest is Mr. Lucielo Ramirez. So Lucielo Ramirez worked in rural and community development in the Philippines and in Vietnam in the 60s and 70s. In 1980, he worked for UNICEF in Thailand as a senior field officer for the Kampuchean humanitarian operations, and later under the auspices of the World Food Program for the same humanitarian mission. He worked in Peshawar in Pakistan in charge of the World Food Program's Northwestern Frontier Operation. He also became the Deputy Country Director of World Food Program in Mozambique during the civil war between the government and Renamo, and subsequently in Sudan where internal strife abound. He served as country director of World Food Program in Iraq during the country's difficult years. And after retirement from the UN in 1997, he worked for the Caritas in the rehabilitation of East Timor and World Food Program Philippines in Mindanao operations. A gentleman farmer, he and wife Angie live in Aklan and enjoy their grandchildren whenever on visit to Quezon City. Magandang umaga po. Sir Lucielo, good morning.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Good morning. Yeah. All right. So maybe I believe Miss Lori is tuning in from the US, no, Houston. So magandang gabi sa iyo. And si Mr. Lucielo naman is tuning in from Aklan.
Kalibo.
Yeah. Kalibo. So farming ngayon ang pinagkakaabalahan. Right. Sige. Siguro let's you want to learn more about you and about the issue on humanitarianism and all these things, no? Especially with our younger colleagues who are just thinking about entering the profession of humanitarianism. So there's a lot of them who want to understand the context, no? Madami kasi sa atin na parang if there's a crisis, when there's a crisis, you want to help. I think that's very natural among Filipinos to help out, right? But many thought that it's just a one time you go down, you help, you do medical missions, you provide food, etc., and then go back to your regular work. Not so many people actually know about how do you start a career and make it as a career natin of being a humanitarian worker. Siguro from there maybe you could start discussing or telling us about yourselves and where did your humanitarian career start? Who wants to go first?
You decide.
Okay. Sige, kayo na, sir.
Okay.
Sir Luciano.
Okay.
Siguro kwento lang natin how we start, no? In this.
Of course, I'm very pleased that I'm invited in this symposium and able to share my long experience on emergency. Well, the start of my work in emergency was when we were using Morse code as our communication. Morse code, tat, 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 tat. This was in Vietnam for so many years. And then after that, it improved and we have the cell phone and we have the shortwave radio. And when I joined the Kampuchean operation, I have this background of working in several emergencies before with different NGOs. But of course, in Kampuchea, when I worked in Kampuchea, I was recruited as the deputy director, the deputy representative of UNICEF, and that was my first exposure to working with the UN. And it was a big change for me. So what I did was read my UN guidelines, or all these books about rules and regulation about the UN. And after reading that, I reported to my representative. I told him that I have already reviewed the UN guideline. He's from France, and he just laughed loud, and he told me that you don't have to review that. You have to adjust to what is the situation in the field, and follow the regulation, consult the regulation once in a while. And I was so happy that I was given that kind of freedom to work in a very difficult situation along the Thai-Cambodian border, which is quite long. It is first I worked with UNICEF, and later I was working with the United Nations Border Relief Operation, which is funded by World Food Program. And the length of the border where I was working is about 850 kilometers long. It is the distance from Lawag, where Marcos is staying, to Naga, where Lenny is staying. So that was quite a long distance travel that I do a lot of times. And I have...
baka lang,
yes.
Just to give an idea, many people, probably including me, have not heard of Campuchia before. And maybe you could just give an idea where it is and what happened during that time.
Okay, yeah. Of course, Campuchia before was called Cambodia. It is between Thailand and Vietnam. And most of it is flat land. And the mountainous area is close to Thailand. So this is where the Campuchian start to come in when the communist regime of Pol Pot took over. You know, Pol Pot took over Campuchia, and when he took over, he was attacked by the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese were victorious. And at one point, I was myself celebrating because Pol Pot was really a murderous leader, and more than 3 million Khmers were killed during his regime. If you go to Cambodia now, you can see that the brutality of Pol Pot. So when Pol Pot was in charge of Cambodia, it was pure dictatorship. Then the Vietnamese came in 1979. And when the Vietnamese came in, a lot of people were celebrating. And I'm not blaming the people from the UN or the people from different governments if they are so happy that Pol Pot is out. So that's how you see po.
Right. So parang, right.
Well, after that, the people start to move out of Cambodia, and they move to the Thai border, which is quite long. So they move to the points that are controlled by the respective leaders. The Khmer civilians or the Khmer civilians were in the areas controlled by the Khmerus, very isolated section of the Thai-Cambodian border. Mm-hmm. And those refugees coming from the group of Sihanouk, because Sihanouk has a lot of power in Cambodia, went to another area, concentrated in another area. And the people working with Maryknoll, which is supported by the Americans, went to the different areas of the border. During this movement, little is heard about their suffering. Later on, there were the news about starvation was filtering out, and UNICEF. That was my first involvement with UNICEF, was to see the distribution of relief commodities along the Thai-Cambodian border in the central area. During the time, the Thai government is the one that is controlling all the movement of the food, including the distribution. And our team in UNICEF, because I was really serious, I was conscious about the need to monitor the whole thing. We found out that despite the sometimes 80 trucks of food that's being trucked to Cambodia, the following day there's no more food in the encampment, and that was quite sad because with that amount of food, you see a lot of starvation and famine. So we tried to monitor the whole thing, and we devised, from the grassroots, this is grassroots diplomacy, from the grassroots, with the NGOs, with the representative, with the donors, and with the Thai government, we try to isolate, identify the problems. And we found out that much of the food that was being sent to the border is just going to the house and warehouses of the warlords. We have that in the Philippines, in the Ampatuan country. I was there also, and these warlords were controlling the distribution of food. And if you are not very close to these warlords, or you are not a soldier, then poor civilians suffer, and you can see that. And in our monitoring, we found out that it is really a serious case of a wrong distribution of food. We have to talk to the Thai government and allow us to access the camps openly. We have to involve the donors, because the donors are also especially in areas that are there are two kinds of donors. Like the Chinese, they are only interested in providing support to the Imerus, and the Americans are only interested in supporting the Lunul refugees and the Sihanouk refugees. So we just wanted to make sure that the food is distributed, and we have to sometimes, sometimes, but in the afternoon or even early evenings, we have to meet with the warlords.
Right.
And the meeting with the yes.
Right. With all of these things happening, so I'm hearing a lot of the movement of refugees, or even the movement of migration of people going to the border, and then having to, by being in between borders of two states, etc. Then you have conflicts, power, also at a certain point, what do you call it, greed, no? Yung hoarding of all these resources. But also we would like to check also, were you there during the time that there were, with regards to the killing fields? You experienced that?
I was on the other side. I was in Vietnam. Before that, I was with the American, working with the Americans. Before that, and here with the UN, I have seen the killing fields. Later on, I have seen the people that are doing the killing fields in their own camp when they are very close to the Thai border. It's a very restricted area, I tell you. You can hardly go into that area. It only took some time. We have to build the confidence of the Thai special forces that are in charge of that particular sector of the border to trust us. Well, and you can just imagine the work we are doing to get those Thai special intelligence people to trust us. Sometimes you have to work beyond office hours, and sometimes we have to share drinks and meals, and we make important decisions after that. And the decision that we make in the field, and these are the grassroots decisions. are
Right.
transmitted to the commanding officers, and the ambassadors and the diplomats will normally agree, most of the time, agree on our proposal, which we have agreed in the field.
Right. Ms. Lucielo, just out of curiosity, during these times, if I may ask, how old were you at the time? I mean, dealing with all of this experience.
I was in with the UNICEF. I was about 40 years old, but I was working with the Americans for a longer period in Vietnam. And in terms of my exposure to conflict, I was born before Second World War, so we are exposed to being displaced people
Right.
in Aklan during the Second World War,
Right.
and
Was that a driving force for you to enter the humanitarian career, Luciano?
it is a driving force for me. My experiences when I was young, very young, was almost my motivation in choosing my career to work with work in emergency, an emergency alone, and I work until I retired, and even until my retirement, I'm still called to go to check this problem in Maguindanao and North Korea.
Parang it never
I
ends.
enjoy it. It's a challenge.
Yeah, right. Anyways, sige. Thank you, Sir Luciano. No, if we would like to hear also from Miss Lori on if you have a similar background, and also what led you to working in the humanitarian career, and also I believe you also have a big crisis that you had to deal with. No?
Yeah.
History,
Okay.
no? Go ahead, Miss Lori. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Migs. I think Lucielo has a longer experience than mine. So, but I would like to focus on my experience in Rwanda, that is post-genocide. So the genocide happened in 1994, between April to July in 1994, and I joined UNICEF Rwanda in 1996. So if you can, I just like to explain the context of conflict in Rwanda, and then I will go into what humanitarian action did the UN do as a response to the crisis, and my role specifically as the chief of section of the Child Protection Program in Rwanda, UNICEF. And lastly, maybe some lessons learned. So I'll do that very quickly. So can we start with, I think it's slide number 3, just to look at the history of conflict in Rwanda. Do we have somebody here who can show the slide? This next slide, please. Okay, this is the time zone of the Rwandan conflict. So it's a conflict endemic country, Rwanda. So the refugee situation started in the 50s. Then the killings and the ethnic conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis, these are the majority population of Rwanda. The Hutus is about more than 80% of the population in Rwanda, and the Tutsis are, more or less almost 20%. So it's a minority in number, the Tutsis, but they are the most, or they were the most privileged ones than the Hutus. Well, the influence of the French, German governments at the time. So if you look at the time frame of conflict in Rwanda, it started in 59, then the 60s continues, still the fight between the two tribes, Hutus and Tutsis. So then in 1980s, there was already a huge refugee situation, and they go cross-border to Burundi. That's the neighboring country. If you can go back to slide number 1, just to look at the map of Rwanda. So you will notice that Rwanda is surrounded by Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Tanzania. So most of the refugees, however, went to 2 countries. These are Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the former Zaire. So please go back to the 3rd slide, please. Now, what happened in 1994 was the worst kind of conflict. But in the process, all those years, there was already a systematic or a systemic discrimination of the Tutsis. And the hatred between these two tribes really existed for a long time. And the violence and the abuse, between these two tribes have happened so long time for a number of years. Now, but in April 6 of 1994, the death of our Rwandan president, Habyarimana, really triggered the genocide. In other words, I think his plane was shut down, but nobody knows until now who did it. So the death of that Rwandan president, Hutu president, caused the chaos and the random killings, and like in 3 months, almost 1 million people, including children, were killed. So that happened, and in 100 days, 1 million people killed, over 200,000 children orphaned and unaccompanied, hundreds of women raped, over 60,000 children became household heads. So these were the immediate results of that conflict. Then what did the UN do to respond to this crisis? Can we show the next slide? Okay, the humanitarian action. It's a bit a busy slide. Now, I would like to stress that there was a feeling that the UN did not do enough to save the lives of the Rwandese at the time. So like many other countries, they just watched when the genocide happened in Rwanda. So that in the very beginning, there was a problem of mistrust on the UN as supposedly the leader, the coordinator of all humanitarian assistance. So it took some time to rebuild that trust. So what did the UN do in the first place? Now, I would like to focus on 3 areas: the coordination and leadership, the UN peacekeeping. So I'm sure the UN peacekeeping forces are always present wherever crisis is happening, and of course, the emergency response. Now, the first thing that the UN did to show the leadership, the leadership of the UN in Rwanda, really to raise the resources to respond to the situation in Rwanda. And this was followed by, relief organizations like WFP, UNHCR, and of course UNICEF. And we have different programs in terms of services. So the resources that was raised by the UN, majority of this went to WFP, of course, and UNHCR, because these are the 2 UN agencies which are sort of the stars in emergency situation, because they provide food assistance, and then UNHCR, of course, looking at the situation of the refugees in the camps. So can we just remove the slides? So I'm done with the slides. So so this is the scope of the humanitarian action of the United Nations. Now, my personal experience as the chief of section of the child protection program in Rwanda was very much focused on the response to the unaccompanied children, particularly their tracing and reunification, and of course, the trauma recovery program. I'm not an expert on that, but the role of the UNICEF at the time is to convince government that they really need a trauma recovery and psychosocial programs really to restore, the normal sort of normalcy of lives, especially among children. And so that was my focus as the program officer there. Now, what did we do specifically? Well, I also would like to mention that UNICEF always has a comprehensive program of humanitarian response. So we have a health program, health section, nutrition, water and sanitation, education. So these are parallel programs with child protection. Now, my area was on child protection. When we work in humanitarian action or emergency response, for example, sometimes you get lost along the way because there are too many, the magnitude, the number of people affected, the various needs, the magnitude of the needs, the number of people that you are going to assist, sometimes you get lost along the way where to focus. So it was a process where there was series of consultations among partners, among government who did not trust us in the very beginning, and really come out with where should we focus our assistance. And I think that was very important. Even how huge the problem is, you really need to identify where you can focus on or where you should focus on. So therefore, it was agreed that in the child protection program, for example, because of the magnitude of the victims, you're looking at 120,000 or more children in evacuation centers. You're looking at child soldiers. You're looking at more than 60,000 children heading households. So the magnitude itself will really convince each one that we should focus on this area. So tracing and reunification was there in partnership with ICRC, Save the Children, a lot of NGOs, community-based organizations and all. So tracing and reunification, including cross-border reunification. These are particularly from Burundi. The second area that my role as a program officer, my experience is really to build a trauma and counseling center. So as I've said, I have no expertise in that area, but the key role that I played was really to sell this program to government and to the NGOs and to the leadership at the community level that you really need this program. And that particular area, it was really difficult. I mean, they think of food first. Of course, that's natural. Food, water, and sanitation and all before addressing trauma of children. And that selling, that marketing thing really convincing government, because there was no money for psychosocial programs to be implemented, or there was a little, very limited resources for that. So to sell it to government, to make it a permanent program in the ministries, for example, in the social ministries, was a difficult challenge. Then the other area that was really challenging is, for example, if you have reunified or found some adult caregivers for unaccompanied children, so they are moved to the relatives or to the churches or to some other members of the communities who are willing to take on the responsibility of looking after these children. Now, the challenge of monitoring and really looking into the situation of children while they are in a different family situation. So looking at, okay, are these children going to school? Are they not used as child laborers for the households? Are they abused or not? How about the siblings? Are they being separated from their siblings? So this is the area where it is most challenging because, mobilizing communities and responsible members of that society where it came from too much hatred and fight against each other, and mobilizing them to really look into the situation of children in their new families setup. So if looking back, I think the issue of really the depth of the violence that the population, the Hutus and the Tutsis in particular, have experienced, it's difficult to understand. I mean, you cannot just say that, okay, you implement these programs without looking into or without being sensitive on where they're coming from. So you have to require a lot of balancing on these issues. And I would just like to cite an example that we tried a sort of reconciliation processes, because in the UNICEF and even in other UN agencies, the staff members are composed of Hutus and Tutsis. And some of the staff members, for example, they saw their own sister killed by the brother of a co-worker. I mean, that kind of, suffering, the in-depth suffering is there. So when we tried to have the reconciliation program that we tried to introduce, which I think did not work, we invited experts African experts and also international experts, and even church members of church members of the communities. But in the process, nobody was talking. There was numbness. Nobody would like to respond to questions. Nobody wants to talk about it. So leave it. I mean, you know, there are things that you can only achieve, but in terms of really having a team where everybody is happy or, you know, very positive on this issue, sometimes it's impossible. So I think, so I don't know, okay, lessons learned. Number one, and maybe I'll be repeating myself, ideally, if you go into an emergency response, it will be ideal if you already have a defined or a territorial definition of who will do what when you go, but which is difficult, no? But I think with the modern technology now, with a lot of trainings in risk assessment and disaster response and management, maybe these things are easier now. But it's very complicated in a huge emergency response with a lot of donors from the different countries, with a lot of priorities, different priorities, what population to serve. And I think this was mentioned by Lucilo also. That kind of environment sometimes is, I mean, it's difficult to, well, there's a solution, but then in the beginning it's difficult. But if you have a sort of, before you go to an emergency response, more or less a defined actions already, or who will do what resources to raise, where should they go? And if you have that defined sort of scope of your responsibilities and accountabilities, then maybe it could be easier. And the second is, lessons learned is, as a United Nations body, for UNICEF, for example, we always work through government. And sometimes the government that we're working with or working for is not or is the source of some injustices and discrimination. So that kind of, I think Cesc and maybe Richard, my boss, they have more experiences on this as country representatives. But you begin also to question that kind of working environment you have. So it's always good to expand partnerships, to include non-government organizations, to include community-based organizations in helping, or to help in delivering or providing the services that are required by the communities. So expanded partnership, I think, is a good approach in terms of maintaining balance between an oppressive government and, but you have no choice sometimes, you really have to work with them. So for example, so in Rwanda, what ended the conflict was when the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and they are now the existing government of Rwanda, and the head of this is Paul Kagame. So until now, he is the president of Rwanda since 1996. Now, these are the trained military and political leaders who were refugees in Uganda, most of them, and then who fought against the Hutu government during the genocide, and they won. So they are now running the country. Now, in the beginning, of course, they saw the UN as pro-Hutu government because you were working with them. So again, this kind of balancing that you need to do, that yes, we work with you, but at the same time, we should not you should sort of really work on the priorities that we believe should be carried on in the process. So I don't know, it's kind of difficult. Sometimes I found it difficult really to balance these issues of pro-oppressive government and at the same time you have to do your duty to respond to the emergencies in that setup. But what helped me along the way and what helped us as a team in child protection program in UNICEF was the expanded partnership with the NGOs, because they have voices, the communities have voices that really represent the voices of the people in the communities. And the government, most of the time, listen to this, because, you know, for some what is this, vested interest also in the process. So I think those are the points that I could share right now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lori, for that extensive sharing of experience on how more or less the UN system works. You know? May it be in a good way or in a bad way or questionable. Sometimes you're not sure about the approach, you know, of certain aspects. But what I'm hearing is that I'd like to talk about two major things. One is on basically on it seems that like for both UNICEF and World Food Program, one of the major focus is really to provide the basic needs of the population who are at risk, right? So, but also there's also an aspect we know in big thing when it comes to United Nations is the concept also of human rights, right? So somehow, Ms. Lori, you already touched about saying that yes, by principle, it might be that you're not agreeing to the way how the government is doing its job. Maybe, you know, not following or not respecting some human rights approaches, etc. But still, you need to provide the services, the humanitarian needs that are there that the community would need, right? Or the vulnerable population would need. You know? So parang it shows the complexity of also how to be a humanitarian organization down on the ground. You know? So on that note lang siguro, I'll ask Dr. Sir Lucielo here that did he have the same concern or not conflict, but what do you call it, dilemma at that time of how do you deal with government, or not necessarily government, but the other faction in a war where you don't agree with their principles, but you still need to provide support in the community. So how did you come about delivering those aids? Yung binabanggit nyo kanina, Sir Lucielo, na grassroots diplomacy, no? That regardless of the higher powers or who's in power, your main mission is really to go be able to provide those services on the ground. Baka you can have a may experience kayo maalala dati na how did you, you know, ano yung ginawa niyo last time. Naka-mute po kayo, sir. If you can ask you to unmute.
Okay.
One more, sorry. You're still on mute po, sir. There you go. Yes.
Yeah. Your question again?
Yeah. So you want to go back and dig deeper on the grassroots diplomacy na binanggit nyo kanina. No, of you're one of the main purpose of the humanitarian aid is really to provide for the basic needs on the ground, right? Regardless of if you agree or does not agree with the principles or how the government or the warring factions are, you know, governing in different areas. So
sometimes I have experience in several instances, not just Cambodia, but in so many places where I was assigned, wherein sometimes we don't agree completely with the people we are working with, but we have to make compromises. And that compromises should be something that is acceptable to the UN, to the donors, and to the other party that is opposing it. I will cite to you an example. In Cambodia, because I was talking about Cambodia, the warlords are controlling the flow of commodity relief in the beginning. The flow of relief commodity from Thailand to Cambodia, and even inside Cambodia, because we don't want food and relief assistance to be the magnet for the Cambodian people to rush to the border. So what we did was we made compromises. The warlords insisted that their assistance, that assistance should be provided to them through him, the warlords, because they control the people, and they said they have the soldiers. It took a long time to convince them that we cannot agree on that, and the donors will not agree on that also. The Thai government will not agree on that. So after several meetings with them and with this partnership, we call it expanded partnership with the government, the NGOs, and the donors, we were able to sit down and discuss that. Okay, you have your soldiers, but we are not going to feed your soldiers because they have their own black marketing work, and we are frank with that on them. We don't hide anything from them because we have good monitoring information already. We know what kind of weapons they have. We know what kind of assistance they're getting for different people. So you can assist us by providing us support so that we can work harmoniously. This is very sensitive because I have to clear this with our boss in Bangkok. Our boss in Bangkok was listening to me very carefully. I told him that we have the choice of not working with these bandidos, or these warlords, and people will starve. People will really starve. Nothing will go inside Cambodia because we are also providing food inside Cambodia. We have to make compromises. And he asked me, what is the compromise that I suggest? And we have already made, one of the suggestions that I made was after some discussion with NGOs, with the Thai government and the field officers of the different embassy, especially the American embassy, the special team assigned in that area, that we should reconsider the position of the warlords by providing assistance to some of them, by giving them tasks. So the most acceptable term that we used at that time was civilian protectors, because I know that their number is about 250 to 300 soldiers that we need. But we cannot provide them any assistance to the soldiers. So we made them into civilian protectors, which is good, because if there are no civilian protectors, riots during deliveries and delivery of services, they can disrupt this. So it was acceptable to them that we consider some of their demands to provide assistance to their soldiers, which we said they are not soldiers, they are civilian protectors, and they agree. So the Thai government was happy, the Americans were happy, the donors were happy, and the UN was find it acceptable, civilian protectors. And in the same case, another experience that I have is my exposure to the Afghan crisis. The Afghan crisis, we provide assistance to the Afghans through the frontier. We provide them assistance, and the warlords, the Mujahideen leaders, will make sure that they control everything. But we said no. We have to give it to the tribal chief and the women, especially the women and the children, and then. But they cannot go anywhere. You cannot move anywhere without our protection. So I said, what kind of protection do we need? Oh, we have all the guns here to disrupt your operations. And after several discussions, again cleared by my my boss is in Rome, because it is some policy that we have to consider. Also, the donors of this assistance, we have to agree that this mujahideen that are providing assistance to us, I think I counted about 2,000 of them we are providing assistance to them. Will not be, because I told them they should cooperate in our convoy, in our distribution of food. But we don't call them mujahideen. We call them bachelor refugees, because they are all. So it's just a matter of compromise. And everybody is happy. Assistance is flowing to the people who need the services. So compromise is very important.
Yeah. So compromise, sir, just want to clarify that, Sir Luciano. So in terms of compromising, is there certain principles that you're not willing to?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So what are those, sir?
Well, we don't provide assistance directly to the military. We cannot do that. But some of these people, some sector of the military are involved in the administration of relief delivers. So we take into that account. If they are providing us in the administration, in providing security, they can be considered.
All right. Yeah.
That's the compromise that I think, and I was supported by my bosses there before in Rome, and even the donors, they like this making of compromise, because that's the only way you can make the people in Cambodia or Afghanistan survive.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sir Luciano. Ms. Lori, do you want to add anything that about compromise? Yeah. Or
Maybe,
an experience that you had that really bothered you and
yeah, I think it's a good point, no, in terms of having some sort of
Flexibility.
compromise sort of solutions on that. But there are aspects that I believe as a person or as an organization that you are not willing to compromise. For example, if the government wants you to just provide the services in the evacuation centers and leave the communities, because majority of them were Hutus, that no services will be available to the Hutus living in these communities. Now we have to remember that the running government now is the Tutsis, no, from Uganda. Now, they were in Uganda for a long time, trained there as military officials, as political leaders, and then went back to Rwanda. So now they are not willing, and you are instructed specifically that, okay, you don't go to this area because most of the people there, or this is a Hutu, majority of the Hutus live there. So therefore, your services should be limited to these areas. As a United Nations agency, you cannot compromise that. Services should be available, health, education, protection services should be available to all. Now, that's why in the process, and then the other one is the child soldiers. Child soldiers were Hutus primarily. So therefore they said, okay, we should put the child soldiers in jails. And some of them are 6 years old, 10 years old, but can you do that? Can you compromise that? Putting these children in jails because they were child soldiers. Some of them for sure committed some murders, that's for sure. But then, and the other thing, registration of children. We propose that no more ethnic affinity in the registration. No more mention of Hutus or Tutsis in the registration forms of unaccompanied children. They didn't like that, and we have to debate on that for months. Why do they want to put, because that's the cause of discrimination. So these are some of the, the things that you cannot compromise. So the
What
approach,
happened, Miss Lori? So, like on the case of the child soldiers, what happened? So they were not. What did you do?
okay, so there were about 6,000 of them. So it was the new government run by the Tutsis who caught these children, who identified these children. And so the compromise we did was, okay, put them in one center, guarded by your military, but do not put them in jail, guarded by your military, and do some education activities, including psychosocial trauma and all of this. Now, there was some resistance among military because they see these children or they saw these children as criminals, all of them, regardless of age. Now, again, there was a long discussion. That's why our approach was really to get more partners to support us.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a pressure from other partners.
Yes, it helped a lot. It helped a lot because, you know, in some meetings of high officials between the UN and the government high officials, of course, they are very diplomatic about the approach. Yes, we will do things about this, but when you go to the ground and the situation is different. So that partnership, so we build a really intense and how do you call it, very strong bonding with the communities, so the churches, to help us discuss with government, present our proposals. So the proposals, although we prepared it in writing, the document, but this was presented by the local people. That was presented by the local people to the new government. And we stayed in the background. So we just observe the process, document the whole thing, and then, you know, after the meeting and all, so slowly, you know, it's the reintegration part of it.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how we work. So there are just certain principles that, you know, you can compromise.
Yes.
But I think the suggestion of Lucilo here, Mr. Ramirez, is uncompromising. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ms. Lori. At this point, we would like to open the floor if you have any questions from us in the room. Or also a reminder that we are also live in YouTube. So if you're watching at our YouTube channel, you may also post your questions if you want. So, right. Okay. Would like to acknowledge Miss Mary Rosales on the floor, and then I'll call Miss Soc Reyes. Miss Mary?
Yes,
Please go ahead.
thank you. It's really a privilege to listen to my two colleagues. I was former UNICEF Regional Director, and Lori Calvo's and also Mr. Ramirez's comments about child soldiers, or particularly, reminded me of a situation that might be useful for the listeners also. Just briefly, President Museveni of Uganda had been a rebel for many years. All right, so they were fighting civil war and he won. So he occupied Uganda, Kampala, and he was taking over the government. Immediately on day 2, UNICEF, as Lori knows, is already there. And so on day 2, with the representative of UNICEF in Uganda, we called on the president and said, UNICEF is here. We can help you with the situation of children in your country. He said, my number 1 priority at the moment is that you help my child soldiers to have a school in our campus, in our fortress. And I said, well, you know, sir, that usually you have to demobilize your child soldiers and send them back to their families. We can help you with the Red Cross, ICRC, find families or relatives, just as Lori was doing. He said, no, I don't want to do that. These children are my family. We found them in the forest, you know, but they have been serving as carriers of water and so on. Many of them actually were carrying guns and so on. But he said, I will not let them go because they're my family. So, you know, that issue of compromise, which our two people are talking about, then comes into the picture. UNICEF could not possibly allow, you know, the soldiers would not be demobilized, child soldiers.
Right.
So we said, all right, sir, you have to do what you have to, but how about the rest of the children? You now run the whole country. There are thousands of children who really need help, and UNICEF will certainly help you with schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let us work with the children outside your camp, not your child soldiers, and we can perhaps talk about that later, right? We didn't leave it, but we said, let's not deal with that because there's also the other children. And that he said, okay, yes, yes. So this issue of compromise, you have to figure out, compromises, because they have, government certainly has these ideas, and that was right. He's not going to abandon his children, et cetera. So just as an example, especially of what Lori was saying about how you have to be so, flexible, and you have to think, how do you solve multiple problems for multiple groups, which are often in conflict? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mary, for joining and also sharing your insight. And maybe it looks like we will need a whole course on this topic of negotiation, right? and we hope that we can also guest you again in our not necessarily in the diplomatic hour, but also in our sessions or classes in the global affairs and diplomacy, especially when we focus on humanitarian diplomacy. Ms. Lori? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to emphasize that in all the programming or advocacy that we make, even during emergency, we should not forget women and girls, because these are the most, how do you call it, in terms of suffering of abuse, potential abuse in camps, in their household, child laborers, being raped. And now this is a very, very critical that we should always remember, that empowering these women, continuing their education, their access to social services, and the respect that they deserve in the communities and in the country as a whole, we should always integrate this as a key component in all our in the programs that we are developing.
That's right. The most vulnerable population group, right? I'll just read one question on the chat box, and then I'll call you Miss Sok, if that's okay. There's a question from Jed, one of the program coordinators for this course. To both speakers, how do you think great power politics impact the success or failure of humanitarian operations? Power politics, how does it play?
Power politics.
Yes.
Well, it's in our experiences in the field, when you say power politics, is it the power of the donor, or because the power of the donor will mean raising funds to support a particular emergency or not to support an emergency. The donor can say, even if the emergency is very serious and people are suffering, a donor will say, no, I'm not interested in that. And the example of that are the Kimarus camp in Cambodian border. No, the Americans and the British or the European donors will not give any assistance to the Kimarus camp because of what they have done during their regime. They are more open to the camp that have been supportive to their group in the past years. So that is how if I understand your question correctly, power politics can be seen. I see it as a role that the donor can play to determine the outcome of their pledges to a particular appeal or to raise their donation.
Jed, you want to expound on the question if you want?
Thank you, Migs. Thank you, Ma'am Lori and Sir Luciano. Thank you very much for your informative insights. My question, Professor, is that if I recall, during the Syria crisis, there was a difficulty for the United Nations, I think led by then UN Secretary Kofi Annan, to send help to Syria. And it's because of the US and the Chinese and the Russians vetoing each other's efforts on Syria. So and so I think this led to a deadlock poster. I think then Secretary Kofi Annan already gave up hope and said that this great power politics has blown out of proportion because they were vetoing each other at the UN. So things were at a deadlock. So in cases such as these, what do you think should I mean, how should things be done po?
You want me to say something about this? I think this is a very politics at the highest level among
Do we deal with that humanitarian workers, Sir Luciano?
As humanitarian workers, I think it is beyond our scope of responsibility to respond to that kind of crisis, because it's something higher than the UN. I mean, it is something higher than it is the major powers that are already deciding, and the UN cannot do anything. How can you influence the Russians? How can you influence the Chinese and the Americans to change their minds? The UN, I think the UN at some point has its level of impotency. And that is one level where the UN is impotent.
Miss Lori?
I don't know if this is an answer to that question, but the UN also uses emissaries, fact-finding missions, reporters as basis for their decisions. So then these emissaries, these fact-finding missions or rapporteurs, they visit the country that is affected, and then they interview people, including UN staff and government, NGOs, and also they get their information through those channels. So I think that's the level that more or less we can say something, or I don't know if this will change the decisions at the higher level, but the UN does not, well, I think they just don't make decisions out of nothing, out of personal feelings or what. So they base it on, fact-finding missions. So there's a lot of that going on in, different countries in conflict, in crisis. So I think that's the level that more or less we can somehow say something or hopefully influence the decision makers.
Right. It reminds me of...
I want to add something.
Go ahead.
I want to add something on that, because the laureate made mention about fact-finding mission. And this was very important experience for me. I think Ces remembered that we have a problem in Sudan. In the Sudan, when Sudan was only one country. We cannot go into South Sudan easily. We have to negotiate very carefully among the Wahhabi people and the tribes and to go to that area. And what we did was conduct joint mission to investigate the problem. The donors send their representative, the rebels send their representative, NGOs, international NGOs, and the UN, we send all our representatives. We go together and collect all the information. After the collection of this information, we sit down, and we make some proposals, recommendations, and solutions. After that, sometimes it takes a long time, several nights of discussion before we come to an agreement. Again, we go back again to the compromise. Somebody is going to ask for compromise. Yeah, and the joint, the partnership between the donors, the victims, and the UN is crucial. Can play a crucial role in solving this kind of, it may be helping this kind of problem that the question about the question that was asked.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Mr. Luciano. At this point, I would like to recognize now the Ambassador Laura. I think it reminds me of our discussion before. Ms. Lula, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to commend and thank Lori and Luciela for this very intensive and very informative discussion. Now we're talking about, what they do and really the powerful nation states get into the picture. And I'm glad that Lori and Luciela said, okay, they send a fact-finding mission. And then, of course, in some areas, I think they send a UN envoy, and that an envoy should be accepted by all the factions, right? I'm thinking of, for instance, the role of a Filipino who was able to play a role in making sure that there was a problem somewhere in Myanmar, and at that point it was the Philippines, that was the one that was trusted to take on the job. So that means that the role of other countries is also considered here. But what I also want to ask Glory, is Rwanda the place where American soldiers were dragged, whose bodies were dragged behind a truck, and
That's
then
Somalia.
that's Somalia. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I pointed this out because sometimes in when you talk about power politics at the level, let's say, the United States, the public perception also counts a lot. The American president and the American foreign policy makers, they do look at the sentiments of the families of the soldiers, and to them, that is very, very important. So when the bodies of the American soldiers were really dragged down the streets, I think it was at that point when President Clinton, I think stopped the operations for a while, right? If I'm not mistaken, because it has become such a hot issue in Washington, D.C. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to interject in the discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. I thought you were gonna go into a topic.
No, I wanted to, kaya lang baka mahuli tayo.
Right.
We are being recorded. I mean, if this is not being recorded, I'm going to tell a lot. Okay, thank you.
Maybe we'll have another show that's called Off the Record, not on the record. All right. This one, Ms. Sok, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed listening to all the insights and information shared with us. I will share my video later. Let me just bring our discussion to Afghanistan, which is, of course, our present, conflict country. In Afghanistan, I think, in terms of humanitarian assistance, member states, donors, and the UN system should use all levers at their disposal to advocate with the de facto authority to reverse the reversals in women's rights, in order for girls to return to high schools and universities, women to jobs, survivors of gender-based violence to protection centers, and others. Now, what are these levers? One is linking development aid to concrete improvements in women's rights. In other words, making it a conditionality. Number two, reducing sanctions. Number three, eventual recognition. Number four, release of frozen assets, $9 billion frozen mainly by the US, particularly $4 billion of private deposits owned by Afghan individuals and companies. Now, each of these levers should be applied in a nuanced manner to effect measurable improvements in the lives and livelihoods of Afghanistan's women and girls. We do not see any other solution for Afghan women. The Taliban are unresponsive to denunciations and condemnations. For example, no, look at this easing of financial restrictions, which is being currently considered as a key lever that can be used to improve women's rights. If the link between easing and women's rights is advocated and facilitated by the UN and agreed by the relevant member states and the de facto authority. When we mean member states, we mean, of course, the Biden administration. You know, and also, I think we should urge the SRSG to argue for such a link in her meetings with the Treasury and the State Department, reminding that Janet Yellen is the first female secretary of the Treasury in the history of the US. So I think that that has to be considered. And right now, really, Afghanistan is our major issue as far as women's rights and humanitarian assistance is concerned. In fact, in Afghanistan right now, you find that many of the provinces still refuse to have women in their humanitarian assistance programs. So that's all, Mr. Dorotan. I was just too excited to share what's happening in Afghanistan, because I think that is our current concern. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sok. And I think that's also linked to when it talks about negotiating powers, right? So you're leveraging what you can offer and what you can ask from
Sure.
certain countries. Yeah.
So I guess the slogan is reverse the reversals.
Yeah. Right. True. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Lori, Ms. Lucero, you want to comment on that one? Anything about Afghanistan? No.
I was assigned to Peshawar, and I was head of the World Food Program organization there in during the height of the Russian incursion. And the Taliban leaders are almost all our neighbors. and is this off the record? Because one of my neighbor is the head of the NGO called Mule International, who became the director of CIA. This is John Brennan.
Yeah.
Is this off the record? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
And since we were together in Vietnam a long time ago, the Americans wanted to provide assistance to us, to the Afghans through the World Food Program. And it's about 25 metric tons of food. You can just imagine how many boatloads of 25 metric tons of food and relief commodities provided by the Americans for the Afghans. The only way they can bring that is to us, because that was our mandate to the border. And one fine evening, I just got a visit from some of my old Vietnam colleagues,
right.
And they wanted us to help in the release of their own food from our warehouse, the release of American commodities from our warehouse to be given to the Mujahideen. And of course, we have to allow that because it's the commodities. So we allow that because it's going to the refugees. Later on, we found out that inside those commodities are the things that brought down the Russian planes that made the withdrawal of the Russians very fast. But this is off the record. But you can ask me on private email, and I can give you more information on this.
Maybe, Mr. Luciello, you could write a book about all your experiences, and then maybe someday it could become a movie series.
Yeah, actually, I was interviewed by one movie director. My movie director, he wanted to make a film out of my experiences, including this movement of clandestine commodities inside relief commodities. We call it non-food items, inside food items.
Is that Filipino, sir? Filipino producer?
Yeah. And the name is Jerry Tirazona, but he died already. And when
Oh,
he calculated the cost of producing this movie, and the
right.
cost is just too much for him.
The cost cost is death, ah.
The costing of the helicopter and
All right. All right.
everything.
Unfortunately, we don't have much time. I know it's a diplomatic hour, but we usually extend up to an hour and a half with us ones. Maybe we could say diplomatic hour and so or so in the next titles of this session.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about more, but I would like to just wrap this up by asking Miss Lori and Miss Lucielo, if you could name around 2 to 3 international humanitarian crisis that's not being spotlighted, but we need to know, or more of our students and even our society needs to know more about. Top of mind that you might have, just to raise an awareness that there's more crises out there that we need to be mindful of.
Yeah. For me, I think the Rohingya is
Mhm.
one, and Sudan. I think that crisis in Sudan, and maybe climate change should be an active element in that discussion.
Right. Thank you, Miss Lori. Yeah, I was in Rohingya. I was in Bangladesh for 7 months, back in 2018. So yeah, biggest refugee camp right now in the world. Yeah. Miss Lucielo?
Yes, actually, my my experience that sometimes disturb me during the night is not my experience with the in international assignment, but when I was designated as part of the like the UN Ombudsman team that investigated the case in Maguindanao,
Mm.
and that gave, and until now I cannot, because maybe the victims are Filipinos, and I talked to the victims, and I talked to the leaders of the former followers of Ampatuan, and uh, with so many of my just hold on. Just, I'm low in but
Okay.
okay. I think this that's my most unforgettable experience is not in Africa or in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia, but in Maguindanao. That's
Right. Yeah,
emergency.
okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and some of we still have pockets of conflicts down south that we need to take note of. Yeah, definitely. And siguro I'll take this time and ask you if you still have some thoughts that you want to share with our viewers before we officially close the program and give the floor to the ambassador for closing.
No.
Siguro we start with Mr. Lucielo. You have a
I
yeah.
don't have any more comments or additional. If you have any questions about, because I cannot condense my my
Okay.
experience in just 1 hour. It is a
Right.
long story. Just ask me
Right.
in my email,
Yes.
and I will
We
respond.
will we will definitely contact you, Sir Luciel, and then make out of several case studies out of your experiences.
Yeah.
Right, great. Thank you so much. Miss Lori?
No, I think I've said.
Nothing? All right. Okay. Before we call on the ambassador, I may like to acknowledge Sir Seth Adorna.
Yeah, I
Sir
just
Seth, go
wanted
ahead.
to have a minute to address ourselves to the students who are in the online diplomatic hour. One, it is so exciting to work in humanitarian emergency, whether it is pre, during, and post. Very concrete, you are able to actually serve humanity. And so I invite students to take special interest in humanitarian work. I've also seen in the last many years a better and more streamlined mainstream organization of the United Nations and the donors and governments in its response to humanitarian crisis. So I would like to refer them to the what is called the cluster approach of the UN, and they can Google it. But it is a very organized system of response. So what Lori was referring earlier in one of her lessons is actually addressed at the very, very top and down to the country level. And I've seen this work in a number of crises already. So I think they will be joining, if they graduate in few years' time, a very organized United Nations system. I think where we are still very, I would say, or needs strengthening is in diplomatic, what I call preventive diplomacy. As you can see in the Rwandan case, it took many, many years of conflict, and this is not being addressed purposively and significantly by different actors until it blew up and we were late. So I think preventive diplomacy in practice with significant resources from the top to the grassroots is very, very important. Where inequity continues to prevail in our countries, there will be conflict. And that is where preventive diplomacy is needed. Over to you, and thanks very much to Miriam College for having AFIX, this partnership happen today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sir Ses, and looking forward to future partnerships. And at this point, we would like Ms. Lula for the closing remarks.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Again, I thank AFIX and especially Ses. I don't know who brought his group forward to us. Ses and I have known each other for I don't know how many years. We met in India when I was ambassador there and he was with UNICEF. And I want to thank you, Lori and Lucielo. We do need, and of course Ses, we do need your inputs as we are, evolving our program. And I think we will need your case studies. We will need your insights in what areas we should be training our students on. But I think I want you to know that that's why we have two coordinators. We have Jed Ravena, who is taking care of the political economy aspect of our program and the humanitarian diplomacy and humanitarian affairs aspect of it through MIGS. It shows how complex, really, the world situation has become and how complex diplomacy has become. And I think when we planned this, maybe we were still babes in the woods, but as we go along now, we see how complex the whole thing is. And I hope that when we graduate our first batch of students, they will have enough wisdom and enough training to go with them so that they can be placed where people think they should be placed. And of course, speaking about Miriam College, we are now trying to convince and to influence our students not to focus on the comfortable zones of life, as we call it, not the corporate world, but rather to move beyond that and to go to where, life really happens, outside where there is inequity, as Ses said, and also especially in the Philippines. So we want them to get involved, not only humanitarian affairs, but in education, in social development, in social change. So with this message, I wish to thank you for being with us this morning. And this is not the last, okay? We will have more of you, more of your colleagues talk about other things. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lula. And before we officially close, maybe request everybody to turn on their videos. Maybe we could have a gallery picture.
Oh.
Is that all right?
How do we do that?
Great. Yeah. We very much appreciate it.
I think Joanne Lipon is here, right? Is she still around? Is Joanne around? I know she gave a comment.
I'm sorry, that's my sister. I am Mary Ann Maglib.
Okay.
But also alumni from
yeah,
grade
okay.
school to high school in Maryknoll.
Okay, because Joanne was in college. We were almost at this.
Yes.
Yeah,
But I moved to UP for my college.
Oh, sige, okay. Thank you.
Time to come back, ma'am, in Miriam to teach. All right. Majo or Josel, will take your cue for the photo, if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, everyone. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And on that note, we end our diplomatic hour for episode 5.
Ma'am Lula, if you're
We'll
Thank
see you again in the next one.
Thank you.
si Mary Ann ang editor ng Affix Coffee Table
Ah.
Book.
Diba? Oo. Kasi when I was a student, Joanne Maglipon was the editor of the Kiro. That was our school newspaper. Okay.